the Canucks and the Wild, okay? Two teams going in different directions. One team started hot, one team not so much. But right now, one team's winning some games, the other team not so much. We got that all covered for you here on the crossover episode of Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, this is Brandon Duham, and this is Locked On Wild.
What's going on, Canucks fans and Wild fans? Thanks for joining us for the crossover episode. I'm Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks, and I'm joined by Seth Tupal, the host of Locked On Wild, and also a credentialed media member, baby. Before we get into the episode, I got to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Canucks and Locked On Wild, we're going to pick apart each other's two beloved teams, and then we're going to end the show talking about some old Wild Canucks memories, and maybe ask the question, which team would you rather cheer for as a fan? But before I do that, let me introduce the aforementioned Seth Tupal, the beauty himself. What's going on, buddy? How you doing?
Beggsy, I have been wanting to do this for a long time. And so the fact that our teams play each other twice in the next week, perfect opportunity to do so. You guys are crushing it. I'm a huge fan of the entirety of the Locked On Canucks experience. And so for me to be part of it today, love it. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's go. And Kyle couldn't join us, but that's okay, man. That's okay. That's what teammates do. Is they pick each other up, but one guy can't make it. And the Minnesota Wild seem to be picking each other up right now. Not a great start for this team, obviously. Fired their coach. They basically were doing things that we're kind of used to seeing in Vancouver, right? The slow start, the fired coach. We relate to that here on the West Coast, but maybe give us the lowdown on why Dean Evason got the can and whether he deserved to be fired, and how things are now looking under new coach John Hynes.
The funny thing is, through the first 19 games of the season, it couldn't have looked any worse, and it just was everything. It was defensive breakdowns, bad goaltending, abysmal special teams, superstars not looking like they're supposed to, and it led to Bill Guerin getting to the point where he's like, I have to do something, because anything that this coaching staff tries, they tried the tough love approach. They tried the nurturing approach. They tried to just get the guys feeling good about themselves. None of it worked. And so Bill Guerin said, we got to make a change. And Dean Evason paid the price for it. Look, the roster, it's an older roster, not the most fleet of foot, although we're going to talk about that in a second, because you wouldn't know it these days. But it's an older roster, not the speediest roster. And so it's not necessarily Dean's fault. He just ended up paying the price for a roster that's pretty locked in and wasn't performing up to par, because playoffs are the standard here in Minnesota. That's the barometer. And if you get off to a slow start, something's going to have to change. And the only thing that he could was bringing in John Hynes, and it's 4-0 now under the John Hynes experience. They've shifted from a grit and physicality style to just playing quick. And a lot of the listeners are probably saying, well, how can that be? You just said that they're not a fast team. Well, John Hynes has preached quickness in decision-making too, in addition to just trying to play a little faster tempo. Because if you can quickly get out of the defensive zone, push the tempo into the offensive zone, and you just hang out there and you're just whipping shots on the goalie, you're having a great time, that's fun hockey. And so John Hynes came in, a little time off after getting let go from Nashville. Little time off. He saw what was working throughout the NHL, and he said, I want to do that here. And I mean, they just have looked like have looked like the Bruins of last year. I hope I don't regret saying that. Through these last 4 games, it's been sensational.
That's a heck of a quote, man. The Bruins of last year. Wild Nation is pumped up to hear that. And you might have got the blood boiling for Canucks fans too. It's those Boston Bruins, not a beloved team in our parts. Were you surprised that John Hines was the guy that got the job?
I was, and then I started to look into it a little bit. Obviously, they have ties to the Pittsburgh Penguins organization from the Wilkes-Barre days. And so you look at the other options there. I mean, you could have gone the route of Jay Woodcroft probably, and there were a lot of fans that were saying, if we're going to go with the new coach, let's try somebody that's maybe more of an up and comer, as opposed to a guy who has been cycled through a few times through the coaching ranks. But Hines, he's familiar. He plays a similar system, and so I think Bill Guerin looked at this as the best opportunity to jump into a moving car and try to get it back on track without catastrophic results. And so far, it's looked really good. And honestly, I find it funny that he has just been so candid about the fact that he really hasn't done a ton. He hasn't had to because the players are just playing so well so far. And so he just has come in and he's like, look, they're making it easy for me. They're just doing everything we hope that they could. And the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up that Pittsburgh connection because obviously that's pretty prominent in Canuck parts here. But just for the listeners who want the lowdown, Bill Guerin was the assistant general manager of the Pittsburgh Penguins before he was hired as the Wild general manager. Patrick Allvin, after Guerin left, ended up becoming assistant general manager himself before now becoming an NHL general manager. So it's, I guess, it's the battle of the Penguins cast-offs on Thursday night, the battle that most people didn't expect. In terms of these Minnesota Wild right now, what is the biggest flaw with this team? And I guess for Canucks fans, what should opponents be most worried about when facing the Minnesota Wild?
I think the thing that still can be kind of figured out for this Wild team is just getting more from those top level guys. We've seen Kirill Kaprizov get closer to the guy you expected coming into the season. First 19 games were not great for him, but he has shown some real life here over these last four. The Wild have been trying to get Matt Boldy going, and he was the latest winning contestant in the John Hines Daily Double with 2 goals last night against the Calgary Flames. That's now 3 straight games in which a player has had at least 2 goals. So I'm going with the John Hines Daily Double, and we'll see who gets it in this next game. But if they can continue to get that top level offense and just can push teams, the best teams in the league. We're going to see Boston coming up. We're going to see, Dallas and Colorado again. If they can get that top 6 production consistently, that takes pressure off of everything else. And look, I'm not going to wish for bad results, but we've seen John Hines come in and things have gone really, really well. I'm excited to see how he handles adversity. And we got a little taste of that against the Calgary Flames because they made a push late. The Wild just said, all right, bet we'll just go score and we'll just take momentum right back. But there are going to be times where this team is trailing late in the game. What does John Hines do to try to keep this team in it, to try to take the lead? Those are the things. That's the chess match that I'm looking forward to. Again, I love beating teams 4-0, 5-0. We can keep that going as long as we want, but it just is going to be fun to see kind of how he handles things when they don't go well.
Yeah, it's not going to be an unbeaten streak under John Hines. This Wild team is going to lose eventually, probably to the Canucks on Thursday night. Should I put that out there and be that cocky? I don't know. The Canucks are just coming off of a pretty horrid defensive performance, but there's been too much losing in Vancouver, so I like feeling myself. Well, take that whatever way you want, man. That's a clippable clip right there. Before we get to the second segment here, we'll focus more on the Vancouver Canucks. I did want to ask you a bit about Judd Brackett. Okay. Draft guru. Many claim he's a draft guru, at least. He's now been with the Minnesota Wild for 3 drafts. What's the opinion of Judd Brackett in Minnesota now that he's had a few drafts for the Minnesota Wild?
They haven't quite finished the statue yet, but it's in the works. Honestly, he has had some sensational drafts with this Minnesota Wild team. And you look at his first draft coming away with the combination of Jesper Wallstedt and Carson Lambos. I find that so funny still because, hey, guess what? Edmonton could really use a young goalie to try to fix whatever is going wrong with them. Ken Holland was like, nah, we're good. And so Brackett jumped up to get him, and he looks like the franchise goalie going forward while they're just continuing to sit in turmoil, pun intended. So you have that. You've got this really exciting combination from last year's draft of Danila Yurov and Liam Ugrin. That's, I think, going to be a fun combination for this franchise in the next probably 2 or 3 years. Now, this past draft, I know they took Charlie Stramel with their first round pick, and they got mixed results. He's more of a physical forward type, a power forward type center. But then they go get Riley Heidt in the second round, and he is just ripping the doors off. Yeah, just having outrageous numbers so far here this season. And so it's not only the first round picks for Brackett, it's some of those late round gems that he's had. He has been sensational since he took over. And I think the biggest key is that Bill Guerin has said, hey, draft is yours. You go ahead and you go get who you think we're going to need. He just has entrusted a ton of faith in Judd Brackett to handle the draft, and he has more than been rewarded with that.
There we go. I know it's Judd Brackett was a beloved figure here in Vancouver, but looking at some of his drafts, it started to sour a bit. I think now that he's gone, you look at guys like Tyler Madden, Michael DiPietro, Jack Rathbone, Colin, Jonah Gadjevich, guys that were considered Judd Brackett picks who, despite having a lot of potential, haven't quite worked out. But looks like I'm hoping that he makes it work for the Minnesota Wild. Coming up on the other side, we'll let Seth grill me about those Vancouver Canucks. Before we do that, I got to let you know to go check out the Locked On Sports 24/7 channel, okay? The first 24/7 channel for sports available on YouTube. Seth's beautiful face has been on there. Maybe my beautiful face will be on there one day. I also got to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of life, but can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season ever in over a decade. This is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if, Seth or one of my friends got sick while a supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we know we'll be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infection, sinusitis, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your first order.
Welcome back to a special crossover episode of Locked On Canucks and Locked On Wilds. We thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day. Go hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, because you don't want to miss out when new episodes for either of these shows drop throughout the week. Seth Topal hanging out with Trevor Beggs, and let's talk a little Canucks here. I got to know, Brock Boeser is just tearing it up this season. And so for all the rumors about Brock Boeser trades in the last couple of seasons, it looks as though he has become a huge part of this team's early success. What have you seen from Boeser so far that's led to him? I mean, it doesn't hurt playing the Oilers a ton, but what have you seen from him to be able to get off to just such a torrid start?
Yeah, Kyle and I were joking on the show about the Canucks record being juiced by playing, with like 5 wins over the worst teams in the NHL, which are the Edmonton Oilers and the San Jose Sharks. All jokes aside, I think, Brock Boeser, honestly, with the completeness of his game, has definitely surprised me this season. Last season alongside JT Miller, the two were scoring goals, but they were porous defensively. Just when those two forwards on the ice, the Canucks were getting scored on a lot, giving up a ton of chances. And, credit to Brock Boeser. He kind of in the offseason said, he wants to stay here, said he's going to change up his workout routine, his offseason routine. And you hear that stuff, and then guys come to camp, and of course they're in the best shape of their life. For Boeser, it really seems to be true. Like, this guy was praised by Tocchet in camp for the shape he was in, and just his commitment on both ends of the puck. Brock Boeser's always been a smart defensive player, but I think this season, with the system Tocchet's put in place, Brock Boeser himself looks like he's kind of smothering puck carries a bit more in the defensive zone. And it helps that he just got his swagger and his confidence back. I think in terms of the goal scoring, he's scoring a lot of his goals from in around the net. I think he's made a commitment to get to the dirty areas of the ice. He's got the smarts to find openings there. But yeah, it's a bit jarring when, the guy has 17 goals last season. He's already got 18 goals right now to lead the NHL. And this was a guy who, this time last year, about a year ago, he was about to be a healthy scratch on a Hockey Fights Cancer Night. And I was at that game, and I remember being very emotional. He gets back into the last second, almost scores the game-winning goal later on. But man, oh man, have we come a long ways from Brock Boeser's agent trying to seek a trade. And I feel like teams like the Wild could have had him for very cheap, right? And yeah, it's kind of crazy still here in Vancouver, but obviously we're pretty thankful for it.
If only for those troublesome cap maneuverings that the Wild have had to do for this year, next year, it could have happened, but just can't do it. I want to ask you about Tocchet, because when Dean Evason was fired, I made a little bit of a comp between what Vancouver went through with Bruce Boudreau being let go. Now, obviously, that was a different situation than what happened with Dean, because Boudreau was allowed to coach for a few games while things were happening behind the scenes. And it felt like this situation just kind of got to the walk the plank point, and that was it. But what did you see from Tocchet in kind of restoring order for this team when they just were, I mean, they were adrift. They were rudderless last year before he took over, and it didn't end up leading to a playoff spot, but it's clearly something that they've built off of this season. And you look at the standings, and they're up in that top 3 in the Pacific Division, and obviously they have continued to buy in what he's selling.
Yeah, I think the circumstances around Boudreau's firing obviously left a sour taste in a lot of people's mouth, right? One of the most respected guys in hockey. And I'll tell my own personal story. I might have told it on the show before. I'm not a credentialed media member like you, Seth, in terms of the full-time important guy, but I'm a part-time credentialed media member, And I was at that Boudreau's last game. And, as the part-time guy, I usually ask my questions towards the end of the scrum. But that Boudreau scrum was unreal. It was, about 3 to 4 times the amount of reporters and cameras in the room. Boudreau walked in and he's like, "What is this, the Stanley Cup final?" Like, still cracking jokes even though he knows his job's over. And I ended up asking like the second question of that scrum only because it was so awkward and tense that no one stepped up with the question after the first question. So I kind of just blurted out a question about what it meant to play in front of the Canucks fans. But again, the circumstances around that firing, not so great. But at the end of the day, and I said at the time, like, I believe Tocchet was the great guy for the job. There was skepticism because he hadn't had a lot of success as a successful NHL head coach. But you listen to this guy talking in interviews before he got hired, and I think he had the perfect blend between being a good systems coach, but also being a good players coach. And I think it's also rare that guys like Tocchet, who were extremely good NHL players, are actually good coaches as well. But I think it's because he was a good 200-foot player during his days as well. So the Canucks are definitely playing more structured. I mean, under Boudreau, they were allowing some of the most high danger chances in the league. They're both down to league average, which is a big jump. And I think, yeah, he just has the team kind of playing more of a smothering style in the defensive zone, playing for each other. I think he's holding guys accountable. He's benched JT Miller for a bad penalty, even though Miller's been, in my opinion, the Canucks MVP this season. So I think he's got the team motivated, playing the right way. I think there's still some personnel issues that make me question whether they're a true contender or not. But I think it's very safe to say that the Canucks have been a lot better than people thought they would be.
Let's talk a little bit about Elias Petterson. Last one I have for you before we hop in the time machine. What is the steam on Petterson? Obviously, I know because we've talked about it on Locked On NHL. It was before Rick Tocchet took over, kind of tenuous to like, do I really want to be part of this with a long-term deal, or do I want to go somewhere else with a little bit better chance to make some noise in the postseason? But at least from my neutral eye, it looks like things are going well enough to the point that at least Pettersson is maybe not as inclined to leave as he was even as far back as last season. What do you think about the chances that he locks in long term to the Canucks future?
I think that's a great question, and I think only Elias Petterson knows. Now, that's a cop out for sure, but this was the biggest question for the Canucks entering the season, right? And this season started for the Canucks with not good vibes, right? In terms of Pettersson saying he wanted to wait. Then reports came out on opening night that the Canucks wanted to also see more from Pettersson, which is crazy to think. Um, Obviously things have been good this season in terms of the point totals. I do think, Canucks fans that watch every game know that his play's dipped over the past month, and he's battling some sort of injury. He's still managing to be one of the best scorers in the league, which I think is a testament to how good he is. But he just hasn't looked the same for the last month, and the Canucks record has kind of slipped, coinciding with that as well. I wouldn't be shocked if he went more of the Austin Matthews route and signed for 4 or 5 years instead of a whole 8-year extension. That really wouldn't surprise me. In fact, I might even wager that's the more likely option right now. But at the end of the day, there's so much parity in the NHL. I don't think Pettersson's going to jump ship and want to be somewhere else. By all accounts, he loves the city of Vancouver. He's a quiet, shy guy. You kind of get that from interviewing him, but he's out and about in Vancouver and on the town. Seems to really like the city by all accounts. So I think that the Canucks continue winning, he's going to sign here. I think the question's more so for how long and what's that dollar amount.
Yeah, the winning cures all. I really do mean it because if I'm playing Call of Duty and I go through a couple of losses in a row, you're just miserable. Like you lose the fun in it. I mean, good Lord, during this losing streak for the Wilds, Philip Gustafson said that ice cream started to taste bad. And I'm like, you are down bad. Like, we need to fix that. And so you win a few games. Look at the Wild. You win 4 games in a row and everything feels like it's back. Vibes are great. Juices are flowing. Everybody's having a great time. Ice cream tastes good again. And so, yeah, as long as the Canucks continue to win, that stuff usually sorts itself out. So time will tell. I feel like I say that way too many times on these episodes, but that's just the nature of the business. Is we'll see how it goes. That's all we can do at this point.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. No one's got that crystal ball. And hey, even though I said the Canucks are winning against the Wild, no one knows what's going to happen in that game coming up. But we're going to hop in the time machine here to wrap up the show because we do know what happened previously in Wild Canucks history, specifically when these teams met in the 0-3 playoffs. Before we do that, I got to let you know that as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Seth, let me ask you quick here because I assume you're a Minnesota Vikings fan, right? What are you feeling for the Vikings this weekend if you're going to sprinkle a little money on FanDuel?
Well, Josh Dobbs is going to be the starting quarterback. I know that for sure. And so should be some turnovers. But honestly, that Raiders team, I think the Vikings can handle business. So if you were asking me to pick, I'd say Vikings cover. And I'm also going with the absolute chaos game for Justin Jefferson right off the bat, back off of injured reserve. Whatever his prop is for receiving yards, smash the over. I think he's good for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns at minimum against the Raiders. The Raiders.
Yeah. The Raiders. Yeah, thankfully I was playing Justin Jefferson in fantasy last week. He did not play. So that's a chalk one up for old Beggsy. That was a nice W right there. Make sure you go get a W with FanDuel. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, overs, unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Okay, all right, you're back for the final segment of the crossover episode, baby, here on Locked On Canucks and Locked On Wild. And, doing my best for Seth, doing my best for you listening right now, even though, a couple technical glitches, okay? I'm here without Kyle. He's my backup at these situations. And you know what? A couple glitches, but we've gotten through here, Seth, and it's been fun talking to you. It's also fun hopping in the time machine And for this final segment, there's kind of two things I wanted to touch on. And the first was, Wild and Canucks had a pretty epic matchup in the 0-3 playoffs. Now, 20 years ago, Seth had a beard back then, ironically enough. It's hard to believe, but the Canucks and Wild faced each other in the playoffs one time. The Wild ended up coming up on top. And Seth, I kind of wanted to ask you about your memories and where you were in life when the Wild and Canucks faced each other in the 0-3 Western Conference semifinals.
I cannot tell you what I was doing at that point because that seems like eons ago. But I will tell you this. My hockey journey has started within the last probably 3 years, like legitimately. And I have learned enough about this team to know that that is still the pinnacle for them. And it's ironic because you're talking about an expansion franchise that is like they're in their third season. These sorts of things, unless you're the Vegas Golden Knights, don't just happen. But the ironic and fascinating thing is if you would have at that point told Minnesota Wild fans that is the farthest you get for 20 seasons, what do you think the reaction is from the fans? Because at that point, you're like, oh, this is great. This is just how this happens. This is how this goes every season. And we've seen now a run of 7 straight first-round exits. The Wild have, I think, 3 postseason series wins. It's something that they just have not been able to get to that same level. And you look at some of those names, and it would have been fascinating for me to hear from fans what they think about the likes. Obviously, we knew Marian Gaborik was going to be great. Ends up being, until Kirill Kaprizov came around, the best player in franchise history. Some of those other household names like Andrew Brunette, Darby Hendrickson, all these names that we look back on now and we're like, these names ended up turning out pretty good. Like, it just would be fascinating to talk to people and say, hey, it turns out this is going to be the most exciting postseason run that this franchise has in their history. How do you feel about that? And there would have been people who would have said, I would trade it all for one cup, like one championship. I would trade every winning season for one cup. And especially true here in Minnesota because the list is not great. Minnesota Twins last one in 1991. Hoisted the World Series trophy in 1991. Nothing since. And it has turned into a minefield of playoff heartbreak, of getting up 2-1 in a series and losing in just death by 1,000 paper cuts. Thankfully, not having to cover the Vikings and talk about all those missed field goals or those interceptions at the Superdome when you have an opportunity to go to the Super Bowl. But Minnesota has become like playoff heartbreak capital of the world. And I don't think anybody at that point, because the World Series was still fresh enough, I don't think anybody in 03 thought we would get to this point. But here we are. And this is just why we do it as sports fans. Every year, the slate is wiped clean. It doesn't matter that you haven't gone to the championship game in like 50 years. You have a chance. That is the beauty of sports. And that is why us Minnesota fans continue to come back year in and year out, because on day one, everybody has an equal opportunity. Well, except Chicago and San Jose. Everybody has an equal opportunity for the cup. And that is the beauty of sports, is because it can just get yanked out from under you so quickly.
Yeah, 100%. And, that kind of leads to my second question. I'll say quickly for Wild Canucks 03. I mean, that Wild team yanked my heart out in 2003. 10-year-old Beggsy there cheering for Tom Bertuzzi, my favorite player. Tom Bertuzzi has his infamous chirp that the Wild are going to go golfing. And then sure enough, the Wild come back, beat the Canucks. They're come from behind 3-1 to win the series 4-3. That really was the end of the West Coast era. I know they had some success after that, but the Bertuzzi Moore incident, the lockout, that Wild team really did end the West Coast Express era a bit too early. The last thing I wanted to touch on, Seth, you look at the Wild and the Canucks, let's say over the past 20 years, like since the lockout, the Minnesota Wild have been the more consistent team. I kind of looked up the NHL standings from the end of that 04-05 lockout, and the Wild are the 10th best team in the NHL. in terms of point percentage, the Canucks are 16th. The Canucks have obviously had more highs and lows with going to the Cup Finals. But maybe, if you were an unbiased fan walking into those situations, would you rather cheer for a team like the Wild, who've had more consistent regular season success, have generally been better to watch? Or would you rather cheer for a team like the Canucks, who had those crazy highs of going to the Cup Final, almost winning it all, but also crazy lows of being one of the worst teams in hockey for the last 5 to 10 years?
See, this is a fascinating question, because I think just for the sake of like regular season enjoyments, it's the Wild because of, the wins that they've racked up. But just to even get a taste of what it's like to see your team play in the Cup Final is so tantalizing that honestly, I think I'm going to pick the Canucks. And I know you trade the bad for the good. And I've been asked that question a million times, is would you be okay with your team being horribly bad for 5 years if you were able to win a Stanley Cup? And I'm like, yes, I would. Yes, I would, because you got one. And now we don't have to keep hearing about it. We don't have to talk about it every time a team gets to the playoffs of, oh, I wonder what's going to happen this time. So I would say to even have had a chance to be there just beats not getting close every single time. Even though you have some of those lulls and some of those low seasons, like, give me that every day of the week.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and I would lean Canucks too. I mean, I think again, you want to taste of the championship. And Seth, I know we're out of time. We got to get out of here because the lockdown overlords are going to say, "Hey, you're over that half-hour mark. Get out of here." But I ask you really quickly first. Don't have to elaborate too much. Who's winning a Stanley Cup first between the Wild and Canucks, two teams that have never won a Stanley Cup?
Wow. Give me I still hold out hope for my squad here. Give me the Wild, because once they get the money back in the account, like you get the funds, you check your bank account to make sure that the check cleared, and then you're like, okay, now I can go spend it. Now I can go have a fun night on the town. Once the Wilds get to that point, I think they're going to be able to really plug some holes and just go full throttle. And then again, it could be that the Wild never lose under John Hines. Like, I know it's a very out there possibility, but we do have to entertain the fact that this team just may never lose again. And so for that option as well, I'll say the Wild first.
Yeah, let's go. And I'm going with my Vancouver Canucks. The pillars are in place for this team. They just need some more depth, especially on that blue line. But I see guys like Petterson, Hughes, Miller, and Demko beating the guys that could carry this team to their first Stanley Cup. But that's for another day. For now, we got to get out of here. We appreciate each and every one of you for joining us. Shout out especially to the everydayers who tune into Locked On Wild and Locked On Canucks. Before you get out of here, make sure you go check out Locked On Canucks. Make sure you go check out Locked On and their first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories in the day with local experts of Locked On, including beauties like Seth Tupal. But for now, we got to get out of here. I'm Trevor Beggs from Locked On Canucks. That guy's Seth Tupal from Locked On Wild, and we appreciate you for tuning in to the crossover episode.